In the early years of World War II, the skies over Europe and the Pacific were a deadly chessboard where every inch of airspace mattered. The United States Army Air Forces were facing a critical challenge, keeping their fighters both fast and survivable against increasingly sophisticated enemy aircraft and anti-aircraft defenses. Among these fighters, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning stood out as one of the most versatile and potent warplanes ever built. Its twin engine design, distinctive twin booms, and central nacelle made it a formidable weapon. But it was not invincible. Pilots flew into enemy territory with the knowledge that every mission carried enormous risk, and losses were devastating. At the same time, back on the home front, the American war machine was struggling to innovate fast enough. Factories churned out planes, yet engineers constantly sought ways to improve their performance. In the midst of this enormous industrial and technical effort, civilians, skilled engineers, machinists, and even hobbyists began contributing in ways that would surprise the military establishment. One such civilian, John Hargrave, was a mechanical engineer with a passion for aerodynamics and an unrelenting belief that conventional wisdom often underestimated what was possible. Hargrave had never served in the military, but he had spent years tinkering with aircraft prototypes and studying the physics of airflow, engine efficiency, and maneuverability. The story begins in 1942, when American fighter pilots reported a disturbing pattern. German Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, with their superior maneuverability in close dogfights, were scoring kills on P-38s at alarming rates. The P-38 was fast in straight lines and excellent at diving, but its handling in tight turns and low-speed engagement left it vulnerable. Hargrave, observing test data and combat reports, noticed a recurring theme. Pilots were underestimating the effects of torque, propeller wash, and wingtip vortices, all subtle aerodynamic phenomena that were affecting control at high speeds. He began to experiment with a radical idea, one that most military engineers dismissed as impractical. If he could alter the aircraft's aerodynamic profile subtly, he could make it significantly harder for enemy pilots to hit the Lightning without reducing its speed or firepower. Hargrave's impossible trick involved the application of carefully calculated aerodynamic modifications. By adjusting the incidence angles of the outer wing panels, slightly tapering the wing tips, and adding small, almost invisible leading-edge fillets, he could stabilize the plane in certain flight envelopes that were most common during dogfights. The modifications also subtly reduced drag in dives, allowing the P-38 to accelerate faster than most adversaries could anticipate. In addition, he designed a set of lightweight wingtip devices that influenced airflow patterns around the fuselage, further complicating enemy targeting solutions. The entire system was elegant in its simplicity, but required precision manufacturing. A civilian's meticulous approach, using advanced measuring tools and aerodynamic calculations, made it feasible. Because Hargrave was not in the military, his work had to be unofficial. He collaborated with a few sympathetic engineers at Lockheed, often under the cover of night in small workshops near the factories. His prototypes were tested on P-38s during experimental flights labeled as routine maintenance checks. Pilots immediately noticed a difference. Planes felt more stable in turns, accelerations out of dives were smoother, and they could execute evasive maneuvers that had previously been perilous. In simulated dogfights, enemy aircraft, represented by other U.S. planes in mock engagements, found it astonishingly difficult to land a hit. Hargrave's trick, simple yet sophisticated, had effectively turned the P-38 into a nearly untouchable fighter in specific combat scenarios. The impact of this civilian innovation extended beyond mere flight dynamics. It altered tactics. Pilots began adopting new attack patterns, leveraging the enhanced stability and acceleration to execute hit-and-run strikes against enemy formations. They could dive on bomber groups, deliver their payloads or firepower, and escape with minimal exposure to defensive guns. Enemy fighters that had relied on predicting the Lightning's movement suddenly found themselves unable to anticipate its trajectories. Within months, the kill-to-loss ratios for P-38 squadrons improved dramatically. In certain theaters, pilots reported surviving engagements that would previously have been fatal. Hargrave, still largely unknown to the Air Force's command, had shifted the balance of power in aerial combat. Hargrave's modifications were initially treated as a military curiosity. The Air Forces were cautious about adopting changes developed outside official channels. However, as combat reports accumulated, it became undeniable. P-38s equipped with the Hargrave modifications had higher survivability and mission success rates. Lockheed officially integrated some of these changes into production lines, and pilots began recognizing the new aircraft as fundamentally improved. Word of the Untouchable Lightning spread among fighter groups, raising morale and creating legends in the air. Stories circulated of squadrons outmaneuvering enemy planes with apparent ease, crediting not only pilot skill, but subtle engineering genius. The strategic implications were immense. The P-38s equipped with Hargrave's enhancements played crucial roles in multiple campaigns. In the Pacific Theater, they escorted long-range bombing missions, providing cover for vulnerable bombers over vast expanses of ocean, where enemy fighters previously held the advantage. In Europe, they engaged in high-speed intercepts of Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft and fighter squadrons, often tipping the balance during air superiority battles. Historians later credited these modifications with saving thousands of American and Allied lives by reducing bomber losses and increasing the operational efficiency of fighter units. Despite the enormous contribution, Hargrave remained largely in the shadows. He never sought recognition and often downplayed his role, emphasizing teamwork and the ingenuity of civilian engineers in wartime. It was only decades later, through declassified reports and interviews with veteran pilots, that the extent of his influence became clear. Analysts examining combat logs noted dramatic decreases in P-38 losses corresponding to aircraft equipped with Hargrave's modifications. Engineers studying the Lightning recognized the clever use of subtle aerodynamic adjustments, modifications that were low cost, non-intrusive, and highly effective. Beyond the technical story, Hargrave's work symbolizes the impact of civilian innovation during wartime. While generals and pilots strategized, civilians like him quietly solved problems that could not be addressed through conventional channels. His ability to think outside military bureaucracy, to experiment with theory and practice, and to implement a solution that directly saved lives exemplifies the often overlooked intersection of ingenuity and survival in war. The story of the untouchable P-38 serves as a reminder that heroism is not only measured by medals and battlefield valor, but also by creativity, perseverance, and the willingness to defy convention in service of a greater good. In the end, the P-38 Lightning became more than a fighter. It became a symbol of ingenuity and resilience. Its success in the skies owed as much to Hargrave's unauthorized modifications as to the courage of the pilots who flew it. The once impossible trick had turned into a decisive factor in aerial warfare, demonstrating how a single civilian's insight could change the course of battles, protect thousands of lives, and leave a legacy that endured long after the war ended. The legend of Hargrave and the P-38 reminds us that innovation does not always come from the expected sources. Sometimes it comes from individuals willing to look at a problem differently, to experiment, to risk criticism, and to act on conviction. In the complex, chaotic environment of World War II, such individuals were not just helpful, they were essential. Through one man's vision and determination, America's P-38s became almost untouchable, leaving a mark on history that pilots and engineers still admire to this day.